Hello, everyone. The House Elections Committee will come to order. Thank you for coming at this time, which is different than our normal time. And would the clerk please take the attendance?
Chair Cerniglia.
Here.
Representatives Wagella.
Here.
Hope.
Here.
Colzar.
Here.
Burns.
Here.
Churches.
Here.
Smith.
Present.
DeBoyer.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Representative Hope makes a motion to adopt the minutes from the April 11, 2023 meeting. Without objections, the minutes are adopted. For today's agenda, we will have testimony on Senate Bill 259, which was introduced by Senator Bueno. Here to present from Senator Bueno's office is Bill Drake, Senator Bueno's Chief of Staff. Bill Drake, if you would join us. And am I pronouncing the senator's name correctly?
Yes.
Oh, well, I'm glad to hear that. So if you would like to just tell us about this bill that we have before us today, and then stay to answer some questions for us, that would be immensely helpful.
Certainly. Madam Chair, members of the Elections Committee, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak in support of Senate Bill 259 this afternoon. Senator Bueno regrets that he will not be able to be here because he's in Senate Civil Rights, Judiciary, and Public Safety Committee. The legislation before you today is intended to codify certain language in our state statute as a result of the voter-approved Proposal 22-2 language that was passed last November. First, the bill puts into state statute language regarding the return of absentee ballots from military uniformed service members and overseas voters. The bill before you mirrors the language in the proposal stating that when a ballot is returned and has a postmark on or before Election Day, it is deemed timely received by the city or township clerk within 6 days after the election. And that language is in the proposal. The bill also provides guidance for election officials regarding missing or unclear postmarks and the process for tabulating valid ballots after the 6-day extension period that begins at 8 p.m. on Election Day. In addition, some of you may be aware that Senator Johnson and Senator Bueno worked on a bipartisan package of legislation that was signed into law, allowing active service members to return a ballot through a secure electronic portal using a Department of Defense issued common access card. The bill before you retains language clarifying rule promulgation and important guidelines for our dedicated clerks and election officials. In closing, the bill was reported out of Senate elections by a vote of 8-0 and passed the full Senate with bipartisan support. Thank you very much for your consideration. And I know there are others here that would like to also testify.
Thank you. Do we have questions? Yes, Representative DeBoyer.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned that this bill mirrors the language from Proposal 2, but I guess the piece that I'm missing is the piece where it goes on to say, beyond mirroring the language of Proposal 2, that a signature and a date by the voter is adequate in the event that there is a postmark that's missing. Or did I miss that in Proposal 2, that that's actually in there?
No, and that was discussed by many stakeholders. So there are instances where a postmark will be missing, whether two envelopes are stuck together, and we wanted to provide some guidance for the election clerks what to do in that case.
Sure.
You know, if a ballot is coming back from overseas, you know, we don't know what type of postmark or cancellation is on that, you know, that envelope. So we wanted to provide some guidance.
What is the purpose of the postmark? What's the reason that Prop 2 has that specific language in there, the postmark?
To say when it was received, but then the additional language, or to say when it was mailed, but the additional language in the proposal does say to allow for the 6 days.
Okay. What would the purpose of knowing when it has been mailed be?
The deadline for the close of Election Day.
So the language of this bill would say is that we're going to go to the default of a date that is put on by the ballot caster as opposed to a date that was put on by the sending independent agency, correct?
That's a default, and it's to give some clarification to the local clerks.
Right. So,
So if they were to receive it, on election day, doesn't have a postmark, they don't really know what they're supposed to do with it. So we're
Right.
trying to provide some type of guidance.
right, so in November of 22, the people of the state of Michigan spoke and passed Prop 2, correct? But this goes beyond that. This, by the way, promulgated, I think was the word you used, correct? These are promulgated?
No, the Secretary of State is to promulgate rules and procedures
Right.
for implementing the process.
Prop 2, correct? So why are we seeing this bill right now if the rules haven't been promulgated?
Well, this is to give guidance for the Secretary of State and the clerks. The rule promulgation process that will go through JCAR, which is Senator Voino is a member of that. And, in many instances, the legislature does give deference to the departments to promulgate rules. And it's a pretty strict procedure. There's public hearings, there's notices, and it's, more definitive than just allowing them to do policies and procedures.
Right. So that's why I'm curious as to why that's ahead of the rules coming down in the process of promulgation and the discussion coming out of the Secretary of State's office to perhaps address that in the promulgation of the rules.
In many cases, legislation is passed prior to the rule promulgation because the legislation will direct a department to promulgate rules to implement, what's being enacted through state law,
Right.
rather than digging in so deep in state statute and putting everything in law.
Okay. So the promulgation process on Prop 2 is going to come.
I believe there's
Senator DeBoyer, you will have an opportunity to ask the Secretary of State's representative questions about that
Madam
issue.
Chair.
Thank you for answering those questions. And I appreciate your question regarding the postage. That was the postmark. That was also a question that I had myself as to why we would discuss that. But I believe you've answered that. And certainly with the 6 days, within 6 days, understanding, I think this is good clarification so that our clerks know, how to treat those particular ballots. I don't think there's much danger that there's going to be people voting after Election Day and then somehow getting it, overseas, within those 6 days if it hasn't been cast properly within the deadline. So thank you for your work on that. Are there any other questions? No, thank you for your testimony. And now we will hear from the Secretary of State's office, from Aaron Shore, the Michigan Department of State Legislative Policy. I'm sorry, Aaron Shore is the Michigan Department of State Legislative Policy Director. Welcome again to our committee. I believe you will present in support of this bill.
I will. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, committee members. We are happy to be here in support of Senate Bill 259. As as Bill indicated, the legislature last fall did pass a law that's allowing the department to build an electronic return of ballot system for our military voters. But in the meantime, Proposal 22-2 did pass, allowing this 6-day grace period for military and overseas ballots, because we do know that they are anywhere from 20 to 70 times more likely to be received after the point where they can be counted, according to the data that our department has kept. And so we appreciate the voters passing this into part of our Constitution, and the intent of this bill to have the statute line up with that language in the Constitution. And as Representative DeBoyer indicated, to go slightly beyond the minimum guaranteed in the Constitution, because we do want to err on the side of the voter somewhat. And so that language around the date that it's dated and received by the clerk is imperfect, but hopefully this is a small number of ballots that come in with missing or imperfect illegible postmarks, but we do know there will be some, and want to err on the side of the voter. really. So I'm happy to take questions about the bill.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for Ms. Shore? If you don't have this information, that's okay. But if you do, can you share with us if this has received bipartisan support in the Senate at this point?
It did. It was unanimous coming out of committee and somewhat more opposition on the Senate floor, but it was bipartisan. I don't have that total breakdown.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Shore.
Yep.
Here to testify on behalf of the Department of Military and Veterans Affairs is current DMVA Deputy Director and former State Representative Terry Sabo. Welcome, Mr. Sabo.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Committee. Thanks for having us have the ability to come in and testify. Unfortunately, we couldn't have anybody else come in, so you're stuck with me because we had a lot of other people that were out of town on various assignments. But I just want to recap very quickly. In the Senate side, we had, in committee on the Senate side, we had Major Richard Sands come in and testify, and he talked a lot about the difficulties that one encounters when they're serving overseas, when it comes to voting, whether it be the location that they're in. Sometimes they're very remote, sometimes they're very difficult to have outside contact based on where they're assigned to. Some other difficulties included the timing of their movements as far as, you know, when they're ordered to go to a different location, all of those things. But we did also have another person from the department who also spoke, and I want to really clarify the position that that individual took. He did not have the authority to speak on behalf of the entire department, and he did say that we did support this particular bill. But under the direction of General Rogers, that's why I'm here, to make sure that this committee and this body understands that we as a department are taking no position on the bill. We see the value in making sure that our uniformed service members and their families have the ability to vote and to be able to make sure that their vote is counted. But we leave that up to the legislature as well as the lead agency on this bill, which is the Secretary of State. So that is the basis of my testimony today.
Can you perhaps maybe just elaborate a little bit on some issues that service members might have in returning their ballots, or how long that process could take? Is it a couple days? Is it a few weeks?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is based on the information that I received from Major Sands in his testimony, is some of the things that he talked about, where the ability that we have here in the United States, we kind of maybe take it for granted a little bit, and how our postal system works, how with the postmark dates, all those types of things, the expediency of that process, and how that all plays out. But that cannot be said about countries around the world. There are other countries, other locations that do not have that same type of system. It makes it very difficult at times when one sends out an old-fashioned letter to a family member or returning any other mail. There's really no guarantee as to how fast that's going to get back to the United States. So that was one of the things that he really identified, as well as the timing. And so his orders, where he talked about a situation that he was in where his orders were taking him out right before election time a few years ago. And he and his family were going to have to they were leaving the country, heading overseas. And it was a very rapid turnaround, and he got his orders, and he's almost immediately they had to leave. And it was close to an election time, so they didn't have the opportunity to vote here locally, so they tried to vote when they got to their destination outside of the United States, and all they can do is just hope that their vote counted at that point, because the time was going to be very, very condensed, and they weren't 100% sure. So again, that's what we look at as, number one, make sure our National Guard members are going to be covered under this legislation, which they are, but also to do everything that we can to make sure that they can feel confident that their vote counted. But again, we as a department take no position on this bill. We defer to you as a legislature and to the lead agency, the Secretary of State, to make that all come together, however it will be.
I appreciate you elaborating on that. I know, not everyone necessarily corresponds with people overseas, but just from personal experience, I know that at times it takes a lot longer than 6 days, even to get a piece of mail from one country to the next. And I can only imagine, how that could be in some of the places that we have service members. So thank you for elaborating on that. Any other questions? Yes, Representative Wigella.
Thank you for coming here today. My question is just out of curiosity, how many Michigan service members do we have overseas right now? And I'm not sure if the voter registration or voting participation rate, like what that is. How many people are we talking about this applying to in general?
Well, I can't speak on the total number of military personnel because that could take into account the reserves, active duty folks that are stationed currently around the country, around the world. The only thing I could speak to definitively is to our National Guard members, and that number could change at any time. But roughly, we're around 1,000 National Guard members that are currently stationed overseas.
Thank you.
And I should clarify, that's Michigan National Guard members that are overseas.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, we appreciate you being with us here today.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
We also have Chris Swope, the Lansing City Clerk, representing the Michigan Association of Municipal Clerks. I'm here to testify in support of this bill. Welcome, Clerk Swope.
Thank you, Representative Cernoglu. Thank you for taking up this important bill, and I want to thank Senator Voino for introducing this. If I can first just take a moment and kind of give maybe a broad overview for those who may not be totally familiar with the overall UOCAVA process. Military and overseas voters have the right to apply once a year and have that application cover the entire calendar year as a UOCAVA voter. Assuming we get the application at least 45 days before an election, their ballot must be sent to them at least 45 days before the election, and the voter has the option of requesting that ballot to be sent electronically or by postal mail. So most UOCAVA voters do take the option of getting their ballots emailed to them, and so that saves the delivery time in one direction. But keep in mind that sometimes we don't get the application more than 45 days ahead, so that shortens the voter's time to receive and return the ballot. We do, if we receive it later, we do it pretty much immediately and get that ballot to them. And every clerk I'm aware of kind of gives military and overseas voters kind of white glove treatment and makes sure that it's sent to them and does full communication with them as possible. And one thing to keep in mind also about overseas voters, many of them are working overseas for our government on a contractual basis, and so while they are not active military, they may still be serving our country. So I think it was very appropriate and fitting that this constitutional amendment and this bill address both overseas voters as well as those that are on active military duty and their spouses and dependents. In the past, we have not had the opportunity to give them the extra time that they may need, especially for a late deployment overseas or out of the state. So both the bill that allows for the Secretary of State to promulgate rules for the electronic return, which the bill only applies to the active military voters. Keep in mind, though, that rule is to be in place by the end of this year, so we have 3 elections that are under Proposal 2 of 2022 that are not under those rules that are not yet promulgated. So there's still, we still have folks with May elections. City of Lansing, we're going to have August and November elections, and we do need guidance in advance of any rules being promulgated on how to handle these ballots to meet the requirement of the new constitutional language. Addressing a question that was asked earlier about the postmark and the missing postmark. Current state law does address that for voter registrations, and that's in Section 509X of the Michigan election law. And while this language isn't exactly the same, I think it's important to keep in mind that we do receive ballots. Some countries may or may not have postmarks that we can interpret or that would come through clearly. So it is important to have that guidance on how to handle those one way or the other. So I appreciate that being addressed in this bill. And again, we have folks with May elections and they need something in place very quickly. So I do appreciate the expedited manner in which you're taking up this bill. And I'm glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Clerk Swope. I believe we have a question from Representative Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here. As a former clerk myself, I understand the guidance and direction that clerks are seeking right now for this. The concerns that I have, though, I mean, this, as has already been stated, it just goes beyond and expands what the constitutional amendment is. But for one portion of this bill that I read, when it says the return envelope, and then that says is missing or unclear. So if that return envelope is missing, you don't even have a signature to verify or anything. So that's a huge concern of mine as far as security. And how would you explain that?
Well, I believe on that return envelope, as I said, most of them are sent via email.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be, they would, instead of signing the outside of an envelope, there's actually a voter certificate that is part of the email that is sent to them that would be returned with the ballot. So they would have a signature even without the envelope on the emailed ones.
Okay, that's what was clarifying then the voter certificate.
And I agree with you that this is a slight expansion from the constitutional amendment, but keep in mind that my understanding of the amendment was very clear that it is a floor and that the legislature does have the authority to expand rights beyond what is in the amendment.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, obviously, we all want every vote to count, right? Mm-hmm. And I certainly don't want to disenfranchise, especially our military and overseas voters. But that's where lies the issue for me. The biggest part of that is just not having the postmark date, and it just gives it such an open-ended opportunity for, in my mind, more fraud to actually occur. So it's hard for me, seeing this bill and understanding that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and again, the requirement is still that it be received within that 6 days. So if you're making some assumptions, it's coming from a country that has unclear postmarks, and yet it's getting here within 6 days after the election. In all likelihood, the voter probably sent it a couple of weeks before the election. I mean, many of these ballots that we receive, I get contacted by voters because I have a strong communication method where I email them when I do receive their ballot, and some of my overseas voters are like, I mailed it 3 weeks ago. Have you gotten it yet? Have you gotten it yet? And so I'm communicating with them on a regular basis. So a lot of these ballots that are coming from places outside of the United States are taking much longer than the 6 days. So I think in all likelihood, if we get it within that 6 days, there's a pretty strong likelihood of a ballot coming from outside, particularly North America. The voter did mail it before the election day.
Can I ask one more question? Okay. I'm just, as we're talking about this, I'm thinking too, like with the QVF then. So there's obviously going to have to be updates with that. And maybe this isn't the right place to ask you, but so when that would be returned to the clerk's office without a postmark date, I would think that the clerk would say the day she received it or he received it, right? Would that be entered then into the QVF? Well, I mean, or you're just bringing it to the Board of Canvassers?
Right now what we do, so we don't have the opportunity to really look at postmarks because it has to be received in our office by 8 o'clock election night. So if we receive it after that time, we receive it and then mark it as rejected because we got it after the time, regardless of what the postmark is. And I know when we had very late processing in past elections, I know the qualified voter file does cut us off from being able to enter them at midnight on election day. So there are going to be some needs for this, as well as many other things of updates to
The
the
software
qualified
update,
voter
okay.
file. But I would envision that we would, if we receive it, we would mark it as received. And then I think under this process, we would be sending it to the county. And if it's an unclear postmark and they determine that it wasn't signed before the date, that they would have to communicate that to us.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Colazar.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your testimony. How will this impact the length of the canvass, and what kind of pressure does that create for an August-November election?
Well, that's a great question. I and many of my fellow clerks are very concerned that both this 6-day requirement as well as the requirement for 9 days of early voting, which adds almost, if you add the two together, it's almost 3 weeks less time to prepare and implement the November election between August and November. So even without Proposal 2 of 22, we had been asking and looking for an earlier primary date for Michigan. I think it's essential. I think we will have some significant problems in 2024 if that date is not moved. And we're looking at an early May date. I know the counties believe that they need longer to canvass. One of the things that we have an issue with is between August and November, while we do have constitutional requirements for audits, we really don't have time to perform audits between the August and November elections, so those elections kind of get skipped. And then we also have been implementing risk limiting audits to look at the specific, to do some sampling, and those are done post-certification, and the current state law specifically says they don't impact the outcome of the election. So if we do an audit that says the election was wrong, we just say, oh, the election, the winner, the declared winner was not actually the winner, and we move forward without changing it. So a lot of us that are advocates of sampling audits or whatever type of audit we end up settling on a long-term basis, those should impact the outcome of the election, and perhaps take the place of a recount.
Thank you. Representative DeBoyer.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. Thank you for your testimony. I was previously a county clerk, and I want to give you the credit that you're due, because I would say this even about the clerks that were in my county. I never took credit because, frankly, you guys did all the heavy lifting, and that's the truth of the matter. And to go right with Rep. Colasar there, one of the things that I attempted to make my legislators aware of when I was a county clerk was the fact that if you actually look at the statute even currently, right, under the old circumstances, with your ability to do a recount after a certification and then appeal it to circuit court, you actually can get beyond that 45-day deadline that a ballot has to be ready. So I do appreciate your position on that primary needing to come forward, just for the fact that it gives the clerks the time to do the job that they need to do. So thank you for that very much.
Looking back to 22, we had a partial statewide recount of 2 ballot proposals.
Right.
If that had been on an August primary, I don't know how we would have accomplished the November election.
Right. And and I don't profess to be the total expert on how Prop 2 is going to get totally rolled out, but it seems to me we're going to be adding the need to canvass the early votings, right? So potentially we've just doubled the number of precincts in the entire state that need to be canvassed, right?
That's correct, yes.
So that's a significant amount of time that is going to get added to the canvass. So now add that to your additional 9 days and your additional 6 days, right?
Right.
So
right.
so this is really something, and I mean, this is, I guess, the forum, right? We're all here together. We really do got to look at that, I think, so.
And when you, of course, the filing deadlines are tied to the primary election day.
Right.
And some offices can file with a fee, but other offices need to collect significant numbers of signatures throughout the state. So this isn't something that can be decided in January
Right.
for 2024.
Right. Well, thank you again for what you do. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for the clerk? Thank you, Clerk Swope. We also have on Zoom, we have, I believe we have Melanie Macy from Promote the Vote. Hello.
Hi, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, welcome. We just would like to hear your testimony in support of this bill.
Great, thank you. So my name is Melanie Macy. I'm Policy Counsel for Promote the Vote, and I'm here to testify today in support of SB 259. Thank you for allowing me to testify today. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, but I appreciate the opportunity to appear here by Zoom. I'd like to thank Chair Cernoglu and the rest of the committee for taking this bill up so quickly after it unanimously passed the Senate Elections and Ethics Committee last week and passed the full Senate yesterday. Promote the Vote is really thrilled to see this bill move through the legislature in lightning speed, not only because it means that those serving in the military and living overseas can be confident that their votes will be counted, but also because it's the first in a long line of bills implementing the provisions of Prop 2 of 2022, so it bodes well. Last year, Promote the Vote partnered with more than 30 organizations to propose and pass Promote the Vote 2022, which eventually became Proposal 2 of 2022. Prop 2 won with 60% of the vote, a 20-point margin. It also won a majority of counties, including urban, suburban, and rural counties, and was supported by voters across the political spectrum. The passage of Prop 2 enhances the security of our elections and protects the right of every eligible Michigander to vote. A key portion of Prop 2, which is now Article 2, Section 4B of our state constitution, specifically protects the right of those who have sworn to protect all of us, those serving in the military. For too long, we've run the risk of disenfranchising our uniformed and overseas voters, UOCAVA voters, through no fault of their own. Whether their votes counted or not was dependent on how quickly mail was delivered from the four corners of the globe to their city and township clerks here in Michigan. In fact, while less than 1% of Michigan's absentee ballots were rejected in the November 2020 election overall, nearly 4 times as many, 3.8%, of Michigan's military and overseas absentee ballots were rejected because they arrived after the deadline. SB 259, which implements the constitutional amendment, is how we fix that problem and ensure that we are protecting the rights of those who are protecting us. SB 259, which implements a key portion of Prop 22, will allow the ballots of military and overseas voters to be counted so long as they are mailed by Election Day and received by their clerk within 6 days. It's a common sense bill implementing a common sense amendment, and it will mean more Michiganders can feel confident that their voices are being heard. So thank you again, not only on behalf of Promote the Vote, but also on behalf of our military and overseas voters for your work here in ensuring that all eligible votes are counted in Michigan. And I'm happy to take any questions.
I'm gonna ask a question. I don't know if you know the answer to, but it kind of just occurred to me. Why 6 days? Why is 6 days the number of days that we came up with for this?
So I don't have a specific answer for that. I think it's just a common sense amount of time that could, if a ballot was sent from anywhere in the world, a logical amount of time for it to take to get to arrive. I don't think there's a specific reason.
Fair enough. I just happen to have that thought as to if it had to do with deadlines or something. But thank you. Are there any other questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
I'm now going to read some of the cards that we have. In support of the bill, we have Bill Zagman from GCSI representing the Michigan Association of County Clerks. We also have Marissa Kovach representing ACLU of Michigan in support of the bill. We have Jamie Lyons-Eddy representing Voters Not Politicians in support of the bill. We have Rusty Merchant representing Secure Democracy in support of the bill. We have Judy Karanjeff representing the League of Women Voters of Michigan in support of the bill. We have Olivia Luckett, representing the Michigan Democratic Party in support of the bill. We have Matt Patton, representing Protect Democracy in support of the bill. And we have Brad Williams, representing the Detroit Regional Chamber in support of the bill. Thank you all for submitting those cards. Now, Representative Schmidt has an amendment that she will be moving momentarily. Representative Schmidt, would you like to speak to your amendment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can read this if you would like, but it's pretty much what I had asked earlier, offering that the amendment is page 10, line 1, after is, by striking out the word missing, or as I stated in here where it says the voter ballot envelope is missing. Just wanted to have that struck.
Thank you, Representative Schmidt. Does anyone have questions for Representative Schmidt regarding her amendment? Seeing no questions, Representative Schmidt moves her amendment, and the clerk will call the vote.
On the motion to adopt the amendment, Chair Cerniglia?
No.
Representatives Wagella?
No.
Hope?
No.
Colzar?
No.
Burns?
No.
Churches?
No.
Smith?
Yes.
DeBoyer?
Yes.
Madam Chair, you have 2 yeas, 6 nays, 0 pass. The amendment is not adopted.
Thank you. Now, we also have an amendment from Representative DeBoyer. Representative DeBoyer, would you like to speak to your amendment?
If I may, Madam Chair, thank you. Yes, my amendment would be page 10, line 11, and after any, by striking out delivery service and entering into that common carrier. Because common carrier is actually defined in statute, where delivery service is not. Delivery service could be Uber. There's no definition clearly defining delivery service. But common carrier actually in 168.2 line F is actually defined as common carrier means a company that transports mail on reasonable requests on regular routes and at set rates. I think that's is much more clear than just saying a delivery service. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative DeBoyer. Do we have any questions? I have a question, Representative DeBoyer. Have you offered your amendment? Have you shared that with any of our stakeholders?
I have not, just because of the timeline that we've
Thank
been
you.
on. Yeah.
The clerk will call the vote. Oh, I'm sorry. Representative DeBoyer moves his amendment. The clerk will call the vote.
On the motion to adopt the amendment, Chair Cerniglia?
No.
Representatives Wagella?
No.
Hope?
No.
Colzar?
No.
Burns?
No.
Churches?
No.
Smith?
Yes.
DeBoyer?
Yes.
Madam Chair, you have 2 yeas, 6 nays, 0 pass. The amendment is not adopted.
Thank you. I will accept a motion to report Senate Bill 259 from Representative Burns, and the clerk will call the vote.
On the motion to report, Chair Cerniglia?
Yes.
Representatives Wagella?
Yes.
Hope?
Yes.
Colzar?
Yes.
Burns?
Yes.
Churches?
Yes.
Smith?
No.
DeBoyer?
No.
Madam Chair, you have 6 yeas, 2 nays, 0 pass. SB 259 is reported for recommendation.
Thank you. And there being no further business, do I say that I reported? There being no further business before the committee will stand adjourned.